السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. لعل الرئيس الأمريكي دونالد ترامب مصمم على استخدام أسابيعه الأخيرة في السلطة لترك إرثه على شكل حبوب سامة لخليفته جو بايدن، ولا سيما من خلال تعقيد وصد أي فرصة لاستئناف الحوار مع إيران. ويرى أحد الخبراء أن الجمهورية الإسلامية في إيران وبالعناصر الكثيرة التي بحوزتها قادرة على تحويل أي خيار عسكري إسرائيلي أو أمريكي ضدها إلى حبة حمراء انتحارية قاتلة لأي شخص قد يطلقها بهدوء. وبينما كل العالم كان يركز على مدى السنوات الأربع الماضية على The Big One، أي على الأسلحة النووية المفترضة والمزعومة، قامت إيران ببناء سرب تقليدي وذكي ولا يمكن اكتشافه تقريبا بواسطة الرادار من خلية نمل من أسلحة صغيرة تدور حول المنطقة من غزة ولبنان وسوريا والعراق إلى اليمن. إيران بذلك بحسب المراقبين قلبت الحسابات بعيدا عن الصخب والضجيج والاستعراض البهلواني، ولا سيما في مواقع التواصل الاجتماعي. إنها تمتلك النفوذ الآن ولديها خيارات تجارية أخرى تنفتح عليها من خلال التوجه شرقا. وعلى النقيض من ذلك فإن إسرائيل وحلفائها في دول الخليج باتوا اليوم في موقف دفاعي. إذا ماذا بعد؟ وماذا يعني هذا للفترة المقبلة حتى 20 من يناير كانون الثاني وبعد ذاك؟ للإضاءة أكثر على ديناميات المنطقة والعلاقة مع الغرب، ونحن على مشارف نهاية هذا العام الذي يمتلئ بالأحداث السريعة والمربكة والمقلقة والمؤثرة والمزلزلة، يطيب لنا أن نستقبل من مدينة روما في إيطاليا السيد ماركو كارنيلوس، الدبلوماسي الإيطالي السابق والكاتب الجيوسياسي. أهلا بكم إلى حلقة جديدة من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا. Marco Carnellos, geopolitical writer and former Italian diplomat who has served in the foreign policy staff of 3 Italian prime ministers between 1995 and 2011. Welcome to Min الداخل from the inside, Marco.
Good evening. Thank you for the invitation.
Pure pleasure to have you. Well, an observer notes that the last 4 years have seen a transformation in Iran. Its political center of gravity has moved. It is more culturally nationalist. Young and old are equally suspicious of both Europe and America. Its economy, though not thriving, has adapted, but notably Iran literally has transformed in terms of its conventional military capabilities. Iran quietly has inverted the calculus. It possesses the leverage now, and it has other trade options opening to it. Israel and its Gulf state allies, by contrast, are on the defensive. So what is next, Marco?
Well, first of all, I hope that there's nothing like war as next, because it's going to be a problem for everybody, especially in this moment where the coronavirus is affecting so much all the states in the region. So the last thing we need is just a renewed conflict. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, a set of expectations that were created in 2015 when the JCPOA was signed have not materialized. And we know how the story developed in the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. As far as we know, and as the International Atomic Agency certified, Iran honored the commitments it took with the JCPOA. We cannot say the same as far as other member states who signed this agreement, especially the United States. As far as we know, immediately after the signature of the deal, the United States, they removed some sanctions on Iran. The international communities and the United Nations removed sanctions. But at the same time, the impression is that the United States started to make pressure on all the international banking and financial institutions not to deal with Iranian companies. So from the Iranian point of view, the impression is that the economic benefit of the JCPOA never materialized because a lot of companies and banks around the world were too afraid to be blacklisted by the US Treasury. They prefer not to enter in business dealing with Iran. Mm-hmm. And so this benefit did not arrive. Notwithstanding, as far as I know, Iran continued to honor the JCPOA, mm-hmm. and they continue to honor the JCPOA for one more year after President Trump withdrawn the United States from the treaty in 2018. Sure. And only in 2019, as far as we have been told, and as far as these are the evidence so far, Iran decided to reduce its compliance to the JCPOA, mm-hmm. and is carrying out that in a reversing way, in the sense that if the United States should decide to go back into the treaty, go back into the deal, mm-hmm. and starting to respect the Security Council Resolution 2231, there could be the possibility that this Iranian reduced compliance could be reversed.
Right.
Of course, we are in a full of a confrontation in the region, and as you mentioned, there are a capacity of deterrence that Iran has definitely achieved. Mm-hmm. But as I said at the beginning, I prefer not to see this capability tested because it could mm-hmm. imply that the victims.
Right.
The question is, how can we avoid that? How we can go back to a negotiation between Iran and the international community?
My question here, Marco, that even if there is an inauguration on the 20th of January in the US election, and the election and its probity likely will still be fought over in the courts for some time. Legitimacy is eroded and the American polity is fractured. How will this fissure impact on U.S. foreign policy, in your opinion?
There's a lot of expectation on Joe Biden, especially because after 4 years of Donald Trump, it's normal that there are so many expectations around. But we should not forget one point. The new American president will be monopolized by the necessity to deal with the internal problems in the United States. I mean, mainly the coronavirus, where the figures are quite concerning, and also to give a boost to the economy that has been so badly affected. So there's a lot to fix mm-hmm. inside the United States before fixing the United States position around the world. So in terms of time that this new president can dedicate to foreign policy, I'm not sure mm-hmm. how much time he can give. And there's a second element that we should not forget. Early January, we are going to know if Biden presidency will control the Senate or not. Mm-hmm. For example, if the Senate will remain under the Republican control, a significant amount of foreign policy initiative by the new president could be stopped by a Republican Senate. That, by the way, they do not recognize yet the legitimacy of Biden. Mm-hmm. Of course, Iran and the Middle East is going to be one of the most important tests. Mm-hmm. Let's not forget that Jake Sullivan, the new national security advisor of Joe Biden, was the main diplomat that was involved in the negotiation of the JCPOA, and even Anthony Blinken, mm-hmm, mm-hmm, Secretary of State. So maybe these two persons, including President Biden, could feel the necessity to go back to the JCPOA. The problem is how they will go back to the JCPOA, under which conditions, because if they start putting conditions ahead, this is going to be very, very problematic to go back to the Latin status quo ante.
Sure. Mr. Carnellos, allow me here to ask you something about something you believe in, that the U.S. and its allies, whether they like it or not, should adapt to a world where they cannot call all the shots and where their narrative of events is constantly challenged. How fundamental are the problems with the way the U.S. wields power, Marco?
Well, the evidence in the last 20, 30 years is very depressing. What I mean, the United States won the Cold War, no doubt about it. But in the last 30 years, they wasted the political capital they achieved in winning the Cold War. They thought that basically because they won the Cold War, all the nations on the world are going to subscribe to the American way of life and to the American liberal views of how the world should be ruled. Mm-hmm. There are some nations that apparently they do not subscribe to an Americanized world, a liberal order in a way that is following all the prescription that the American foreign policy is sending around. This is evident with China. This is evident with Russia. This is evident with Iran. Iran since at least 40 years, since the Iranian Revolution. Mm-hmm. It's evident with Turkey and many other nations. So the sooner the United States adjusts to a multipolar world where an increasing number of actors are going to have a role and a say on how the world should be ruled, because if they stick to the old system where basically there's only the American leadership and all the others, sooner or later, they have to adjust to this leadership, I'm afraid that we are going to have turbulent times ahead, because what we have seen that China, Russia, and Iran, for example, are not ready anymore to play according only to the rules established by the United States of America.
Right. Allow us, Marco, to stop now for a short break, and afterwards we're going to talk a bit about the normalization of ties with Israel by some Arab regimes recently, but after the break. إذا فاصل قصير ونعود، لا تذهبوا بعيدا. أهلا بكم من جديد. Marco Carnellos, geopolitical writer and former Italian diplomat. Welcome back to من الداخل, sir. What do some Arab regimes stand to gain from the so-called peace with Israel, Marco?
Well, it's let me say that it's a little bit too early to draw a final assessment of what's going on, because there are some states that evidently they decided to go into this step, as they say, because they are afraid of the alleged Iranian influence in the region that is perceived as a threat. We have some states that, like United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, and more recently Morocco and Sudan, they believe that maybe their assessment is that we are going to have the United States less engaged in the region in the future. There are some signals that are coming. And so they basically trying to buy an insurance in order to establish more closer relation with Israel, in order to have not only a political cover, but also possibly reinforce military and intelligence cooperation that, according to their view, is going to allow them to better face Iran. I don't know if this
Do you think
right
that they are going to go into a sort of confrontation on behalf of the Americans and the Israelis with Iran? That's why they are just, preparing the stage for that?
I really hope they are not so crazy, because this is going to be a very, very risky move. If we have to go and see the military performance in Yemen, for example, that the Saudis and up to a certain extent other countries carried out there is not so comforting. We are talking about a confrontation with a group of insurgents like the Houthis that are very, very poor, not so well trained and well armed. So if Yemen must be a test case of how much effective some Arab countries could be against Iran, I believe it could be a very, very risky move. Mm-hmm. On September 14, 2019, we saw what happened in the Saudi oil facility, a very precise attack that basically for a few days shut down 50% of Saudi oil production. I don't believe that this leadership want to risk something so reckless in this way. My really preference is that this country decide to open a table to decide or to conceive or to shape a security architecture in the region in order to start to deal with all the different problems that there are in the region. And with all due respect, I don't believe that the only problem in the region is represented by Iran. There are many other problems in different countries due to social injustice, to lacks of opportunity that should be addressed.
In the sense...
starting with the Palestinian issue that basically has been completely forgotten in the last year.
To stay in the region, Marco, a new great game has begun in the Eastern Mediterranean. Oil and gas are game changers and determiners. Yet in such circumstances, accidents are possible, and the capability to manage them cannot be taken for granted. And this is your opinion, of course. How is the situation now in the Eastern Mediterranean near the end of 2020, and what is your perspective?
The situation is very dangerous and volatile. There are too many overlapping interests. Problem in the definition of boundaries, not only between Israel and Lebanon, but also on the exclusive economic zones of Turkey, Egypt, Cyprus, Libya, Syria. So that's the reason why a sort of contact group for the region, a sort of mechanism of consultation to deal with the crisis even before they come out should be established. I know that it's something very, very difficult because we have to put around the table some interlocutors that usually they don't talk to each other, or they have significant problems in talking among each other. But if, in a way, Lebanon and Israel are trying or are negotiating even in some not institutionalized way for the demarcation of the maritime border, I think some effort should be made. The situation is so volatile that the Arab League, the European Union, the Iran, and all the states of the region should find definitely a table, a platform where this problem can be dealt with and solved with negotiation and not provocations. The first step would be to go back to the JCPOA. And of course, on the JCPOA, the devils will be in the details, how they go back. But definitely, if the JCPOA come back in fruition, further steps can be conceived and further negotiation can be imagined in order to deal with other problems. Of course, there's an attitude to conceive all this problem, and they all basically the international scholars focus on the Iran ballistic missile program, etc. But there are many ballistic missile programs in the region.
Exactly.
There are many activities in the region. So why we need a platform, a political platform to deal with that? Because I don't believe Iran is ready to discuss only its activities carried out in the region, because there are other activities that are carried out in the region that are perceived as a threat by the Iranians.
Sure.
So all the threats should be discussed, all the threats should be placed at the same level, and all the threats should be in a way neutralized.
Sure.
Otherwise, we are going to have the
Yes.
worst prevail.
Yes, I have to ask you here, Marco, my last question. Time has run short, but before COVID-19, Italy was repositioning itself at the political center of Europe between Germany and France. But the onset of the pandemic brought about a shift within both Italian institutions and the public opinion. The Italian government chose China and Russia as its main crisis management partners. To what extent did Italy put itself at the center of a game of narratives that is dangerous for Europe?
There were only some very weak signals about this alleged repositioning of Italy. Yes, we accepted some delivery of aid from China. There was some delivery of aid from Russia. But I don't see for the time being that Italy is going to take a different position from its historical bonds with the European Union members and the United States. This does not mean that certain issues should be dealt with differently. Italy has a diplomatic relation with many countries, and so it should be a pragmatic approach. But to answer your question, it's not so much in the sense that Italy is still a member of the European Union, a full member, and still gives more importance to its historical relation with the United States. It does not prevent Italy to have good relations if it will be possible with Iran, with Russia and China, that are important partners.
Sure. Sure.
Especially for Iran, important trade partners of Italy. And this is something that I hope will be reestablished soon.
Right. Marco Carnellos, former Italian diplomat and geopolitical writer, thank you very much, sir, for your shrewd perspectives. Bless you and be safe.
Thank you very much. The same for you and all my Lebanese friends.
Always a pleasure to have you. Thank you, my dear. والشكر لكم مشاهدينا الكرام على طيب المتابعة. للتفاعل أكثر تابعونا على صفحات السوشيال ميديا من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.